ladies and gentlemen, we are honored this morning with Dr. Heidi Kraft from Psych Armor Institute, who is going to help us understand connection and cohesion, resilient medical teams in stressful times. And this is sponsored by Psych Armor. Thank you so much. And the Colorado Veteran Community Partnership. And our VA partners, our community partners, and everybody are so excited to participate in this webinar. What I would like to ask is for everybody to mute themselves unless you're talking. Please use the chat box if there are questions or concerns. My name is Mary Bolanek, and I am one of the Veteran Community Partnership steering members. And I will be looking at the chat box while you all are listening to Heidi. And I will, at the end, address any questions that are in the box if we have time, and or we'll open up the mics for questions with Dr. Kraft. How's that? Also, one more thing is that if you all close your picture, it'll help preserve some of the bandwidth so that we don't get all glitchy and scratchy. So mics off and cameras off, and use the chat box. And ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Heidi Kraft, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here. I think we are all adapting, aren't we, to this new way of trying to connect and collaborate as professionals. I think we will certainly all be much more versed on Zoom and Google Hangouts than we ever were before. And we'll take it and we'll run with it. And I hope that we will still, even in this type of platform, still have the ability to be interactive. And I would love your thoughts, discussions, and questions at the end of my presentation. I'm admitting a few more. We are up to 65, which is a really wonderful number for this morning. So thank you all so much for being here. Let me share my screen. And we'll get my slides up. There they are. Okay, I'm going to try to move this admit thing over here so that I can see people as they're coming, but if I am a little slow in admitting people, that's what's going on. Okay, good morning. So interestingly, this entire talk came as a sort of surprise to all of us as we had to deal with these new times that we're in the middle of. What we found was that there was suddenly a demand signal among folks like yourself to think about the way that dealing with this unusual situation we find ourselves in the middle of COVID, the way that that was affecting providers. And obviously we know that there are groups of providers right now who are greatly affected by this. And we all have watched, I think, with a lot of empathy, our colleagues in New York City, and those that really did experience this almost like a war zone. But because of that, because we have sort of realized that there is this potential for providers to really have to deal with this whole experience on such a different level, we have found that there's been an interesting kind of sort of demand signal from groups of clinicians to really think about how best we take care of our providers during this time. And so how this sort of came about was that I am an active duty, former active duty Navy psychologist, and I'm still very connected to my community there in the Navy. And they came to me to sort of try to brainstorm, a group over in San Diego, to try to brainstorm what do we need to do for our providers right now? And when we sort of got down to it, we realized that actually military connected people have been through this before, and that we actually do know what to do at this point. And what we should do at this point is remind people about resilience. So this talk is based in some things that you've probably already heard, but during stressful times, we find ourselves sometimes needing those reminders. So I hope that this will be a review, and that hopefully you will also be able to, I think through things maybe a little more creatively, a little more flexibly for yourself, and that maybe we can talk about some of these things together too when we have a few moments for discussion at the end. So without further ado, this is me. I guess you probably saw me on camera a few moments ago, but that's what I used to look like 16 years ago when I was in Iraq. It does, in fact, feel like yesterday, but a lifetime ago at the same time. So I am a former active duty Navy clinical psychologist. I spent 10 years on active duty, and most of my time on active duty was spent with the Marine Corps. I did deploy with the Marine Corps in 2004 during the first battle for Fallujah. And that was, that experience was life-changing for me in many, many ways. As a provider, as a person, I found myself, I think, thinking about things in my life in a really different way. And I think that shaped me. If everyone could please put themselves on mute, that would be so helpful. Thank you very, very much. That has shaped me in so many ways as a provider. So I bring that experience to you today. So what I thought I would do is start off, if it's all right with you, with a little story. This is a story about a time at war. And I'd like to start with it because I think you'll see that as I go through some of the principles of resilience and what we sort of need to remind ourselves of when things get stressful, you'll sort of see where this experience is coming from. So without further ado, just thought I'd share a story with you. So let your minds kind of relax. Mass casualty. The two words hammered away at us, beginning the first day when we sat together on bleachers at Camp Pendleton, holding our empty sea bags in our arms. Mass casualty. The words assaulted us after dark during those 7 months in the desert. They shattered the nights of silence after we collapsed onto our hard cots. We wondered each night if our sleep would be interrupted by the echo of those two words yelled down the concrete corridors of our barracks. When they came, they catapulted us into strange trance-like nights that blurred the boundaries between nightmare and reality, helicopters whirring overhead and voices piercing the blackness. The two words even greeted us in the morning as we debriefed the evening's experiences at staff meetings and medical rounds. We talked about the mass casualty, planned for it, ran drills pretending it was happening, and set up elaborate scenarios to make sure we would be able to function when we were totally overwhelmed. With 2 operating rooms, it did not take much. Any more than 2 surgical cases exceeded our limited field capacity. One day in mid-April, nightmare became reality. Although our experiences to date with multiple patients at once had been called mass casualties, the term was redefined that day. Right before lunch, I stood in front of the hospital in my flak jacket and helmet, taking a picture of one of my colleagues next to the sandbags. Chief Edmondson walked outside and approached me as I tucked the camera into my large cargo pocket in my pants. She whispered in my ear, "Don't leave, Doc," as she eyed unsuspecting Marines walking up to the hospital. "You mean for lunch?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "This isn't for sure yet, but we may be getting 14 from Al-Qaim." I followed her inside. No sooner had I taken off my helmet than the distant thumping of the Blackhawk's blades beat the desert air, audible even when they were several miles from the hospital. I swallowed and found the back of my throat had risen to form a hard lump. Minutes later, the helicopters landed at our makeshift pad, one after the other, in a surreal moving image of black fuselage paint and blood-red crosses, setting down within huge tornadoes of tan dust. We waited inside, watching through the dirty glass doors as medical corpsmen and Marines formed into groups to carry 6 gurneys. Dave, our OR nurse and a former Army Special Forces medic, coordinated litter bearers. His voice was low and raspy from too many years of smoking, and he called their numbers. The teams ducked their heads and ran out to the birds. One by one, each group of 6 men and women grasped the handles of the gurney, slid it out to the hatch of the Black Hawk, pivoted slowly, and brought the heavy, bandaged, and bleeding patient back into our hospital. The corporal was brought in first. I drew in my breath as I saw him. The tube down his throat protruded awkwardly from his mouth. At his brief visit to a forward resuscitative surgical suite before he came to us, other medical personnel had placed this life-saving artificial
VA nationwide teleconferencing system.
If everyone could please mute, that would be super helpful. Thank you. After his brief visit to a forward resuscitative surgical suite before he came to us, other medical personnel had placed this life-saving artificial airway and applied what was now a blood-soaked bandage around his head. His eyes were shut, bulging from his face and giving his eyelids the appearance of swollen, bruised globes. His name, written on black ink on his bare chest, was Dunham. His litter team took him to the SST first. Behind him, other teams carried 13 other patients through our doors according to their triage priority. They formed a crooked line of gurneys resting on the dusty tile floor, each with its litter bearers waiting to pick up the patients again and move them forward in line. Jess, a pediatric cardiologist, and his team of corpsmen worked fast on Corporal Dunham, who had 2 obvious entrance wounds to the frontal lobes of his brain. The Marine made no meaningful movement, and Jess gave the order that he be moved to the expectant ward. This is the combat medical term for the triage area where casualties who are too critically injured to be saved are placed. Most American doctors, even those with wartime experience, never become used to giving that order. I am not sure that Jess ever recovered from it. Our expectant ward appeared to have been an old laundry room. Its cracking tiled floor surrounded a drain in the center of a room. Here, a patient could be moved away from the chaos of the other casualties. Here, he could receive pain medication and supportive care until he died. Our mass casualty plan assigned dentists and dental technicians to monitor the expectant ward. When I arrived, they were taking care of Dunham. I entered the room and spent a few minutes with them as they touched the corporal gently and spoke to him in soft voices. His litter rested on the floor and they sat around him on the tile. At one point, our senior dental technician, DT1 Graham, rose to change a bag of fluids and asked me to take the Marine's hand that he had been holding. I was immediately drawn to Corporal Dunham. I was unable to leave him. We told him we were proud of him and that the Marine Corps was proud of him. The chaplain came in and we all bowed our heads and prayed, asking God to take this brave Marine into his arms. DT1 Graham went through the front pocket of the Marine's desert utility blouse, which had been cut off. We found the rules of engagement card for Operation Iraqi Freedom. His dog tag no longer hung around his neck, likely a result of the blast. As regulations required of all of us, his second tag was laced in his boot. We learned his first 2 initials were JL. We guessed his first name might be John or Justin or Jason. He was not wearing a wedding ring. We called him Corporal Dunham as much as possible. We told him he was doing great. We waited, anticipating his breathing would become labored and his heart rate would become irregular. It never did. His breathing remained steady and slow and his heart beat on. Sometimes I swore I could see it moving under the muscles in his chest. Many long minutes later, I moved his arm. It had looked uncomfortable. He was a tall, muscular young man, and his elbow held off the edge of the cot. I told him what we were doing, and we picked up his arm and adjusted the straps that kept him balanced there. I continued to hold his hand as we moved his arm, and I felt a distinct squeeze. He had squeezed a few times before, but only in twitches. This was different. His whole biceps muscle flexed as he squeezed. I looked at my colleagues. We didn't breathe. He squeezed again so hard that he pulled me toward him. "Corporal Dunham," I said urgently in his ear, "can you hear me? If you can hear me, squeeze my hand again. Now." He did. I looked up, making eye contact with those around me. Everyone's eyes looked the same, huge and hopeful. I looked at our company commander who was lingering by the door. She ran for help. The 5 physicians of our company arrived at the expectant ward in about 1 minute flat. 2 stethoscopes were placed on his neck, and Mike, a family medicine doctor, looked up and said, "I've got 72 beats per minute. Sounds good to me." Jess held open the Marine's eyelid and flipped a light back and forth. Dunham moved his head in response and squeezed my hand again. Several of us cheered. "Get him out of here," came a shout from across the room. Everyone sprang into motion. Voices yelled for a litter team, and within moments, their boots pounded down the passageway. They lifted the gurney and moved him into the intensive care unit, while the admin clerk called for an urgent surgical medevac. Karen, one of the 2 nurses in the ICU that day, knew he had been responding to my voice. And in a gesture of friendship I will never forget, she handed me surgical gloves and asked me to continue to hold his hand. He squeezed frequently then, maintaining a strong grip, especially when I told him he was going in a helicopter. I told him my friend Steve, one of our physician assistants, would be going with him. I laughed each time he squeezed out loud. He moved his head and feet on command. The energy in the room was electric, and we could not help grinning hopefully at each other. The chaplain wandered back in, looking confused. I told him, laughing, "I think this young man might need a different prayer." We heard the roar of the Black Hawk landing outside. The ICU team strapped Corporal Dunham to a gurney, and 6 litter bearers took the handles, a 7th lifting his IV bag. I kept holding his hand. Steve started hand ventilating, and then we all moved into the passageway. It seemed like every person in the company lined those walls as we walked through them and out the double doors. I gripped Dunham's hand tightly and kept talking, unable to control the manic hope in my voice. I told him the doctors and nurses at his next stop would take good care of him, and we would never forget him, and I was proud of him for fighting so hard. We walked all the way to the helicopter. The Army flight medic met us at the hatch. He mentioned the litter bearers to the holding rack, and then I had to let him go. The litter team loaded him in the bird, and we all ducked under the vortex of the rotor blades and backed away. The Black Hawk took off. I stood paralyzed in the light brown dirt, watching the cloud of dust rise and the huge propeller lift them to the bright blue horizon. A large group of people had gathered around the back doors and stood in quiet awe. The rest of our patients were either in surgery or on the ward. We could stop for a moment. I was suddenly aware of my body violently trembling at my knees. I raised shaky hands to my face without realizing I still had my gloves on. And then the tears came. So we've been here before. Those of us who have had the honor to serve our country as military-connected providers, and our patients. We find parts of this, of our COVID-19 crisis, very familiar. And as I mentioned, healthcare providers in certain areas of our country are fighting a war that sometimes sounded a little bit like the story I just told you. I read stories of New York that sounded a lot like that, of American doctors and nurses having to make decisions about triage categories for patients that we don't usually practice. It's something that military providers thought, well, yeah, I've lived that. I just told you a story about that. We had lived it, and it was hard. It's heartbreaking, it's chaotic, it's confusing, but we've seen it before. The future of all of this, the one thing we know for sure is that we don't know, right? This particular situation, our crisis that our country is currently going through, we don't know what will happen. What we do know is that you as providers and support teams, for the patients who turn to you for help, you are ready. You are the mission. No matter how this turns, no matter what happens next, you are the mission. And so when I created this brief for the Navy, I went back to principles that I remembered well. When we're in combat, we think about principles of the best way to treat combat stress. And they included a couple things. They included the PIES principles, which we called PIES: proximity, immediacy, expectancy, and simplicity. We tried, when we were treating combat stress, to follow those 4 principles when we took care of our patients. We found that the literature backed us up, that we felt that that would give us the best chance to take the very best care of our folks and return them to their mission. The most important of those today, expectancy. In the face of this crisis, everyone expects that you will serve your patients and your community and your mission with professionalism and pride. The bottom line, you have the skills you need. Sometimes when it seems really stressful and things seem uncertain and scary, it's helpful to be reminded of that this is your time. I thought it's sometimes helpful to take a look at one version of a disaster curve. This is a disaster response curve by Zunin and Myers, where they were taking a look at specifically providers, but really anyone, first responders, community response, and what happens with regard to our emotional roller coaster that goes along with the disaster curve. If you see that arrow there, we are not into this curve yet. We are still in the pre-disaster phase, the most parts of the country. New York City, I would say, has moved far along into this curve, but really the rest of the country has not, for the most part. So we're still in this warning/threat part of the disaster curve. And so our emotional stability is still pretty high up there, as you can see on the emotional scale on the left. We keep talking about flattening this curve of COVID-19, and we want our new cases to go down and our death rate to go down. And we would call that flattening the curve of the epidemic. Here's the thing though, there really are 2 curves going on right now, and you as providers and first responders and community support personnel in your community, you know this. There's another curve going on, and that curve is anxiety. It's the anxiety around this situation and what might be coming next. We know that the anxiety curve is going to look different than the COVID-19 curve, and we may have 2 curves to flatten. So we need to manage this crisis well, and we need to expect to manage any aftermath of the crisis well, which is where you as mental health providers may be coming into play. So I say again, this is your time. Because we are here, because we are at that place where the arrow is on the curve, this is about resilience. And this is about the tough, resilient people that you work with and that work for you. When there is a threat, which there currently is right now, to you, to your people, to your patients, and to your community, there is a threat. We don't know what will happen, but we know we're in that phase of uncertainty. We have to depend on what we know and what we expect. I'm going to go back to expectancy there. What you expect from yourself, from your people, and from each other. Bottom line, we know there are some things that work. We believe, based on what we know from our time in combat and from other experiences like this, crises that we've gotten through, we believe resilience will be protective in times of great stress. So I've prepared for you a reminder, a review, if you will, a few key takeaways from a few groups that have over the last decades really given us what we know to be true in the literature about the things that protect people and make them resilient. These include operational stress control, stress first aid, psychological first aid, and Figley's resilient caregiver model. So very, very quickly, we're definitely not going into any great detail on any of these, but the US Navy's operational stress control model basically is based in that performance curve that all of you have, I'm sure, seen before, that as stress increases, performance increases until a certain point. And then as stress increases, the performance starts to suffer. And so we know that, and operational stress control is built on that. It's built on principles of resilience that include things like controllability and relationships and trust and meaning. Many of you have seen the stress first aid model. This is out of the National Center for PTSD. There's 7 C's in the stress first aid model, but the ones we're going to focus on are calm, connect, confidence, and competence. I'm sure many of you are also familiar with psychological first aid. This has been proven over many decades now to be a brief intervention that's used after trauma, which can reduce, if it's used correctly, the later development of PTSD. The specific parts of stress first aid, psychological first aid that we'll be focusing on here are connection, coping, and collaborative services. We know that PFA promotes self-efficacy and hope in people. Finally, Charles Figley, who really is the nation's father of compassion, fatigue, and caregiver resilience, he has created multiple models, but the one I'm going to be sort of focusing this on is a model that says that resilience in providers actually can lead us to compassion satisfaction during times of great stress. He focused on positive affect, self-care, and social support. So what I'm going to do is now put those things together for you in 3 kind of clusters of a few things just to remember about your own resilience. So the first is a group that kind of clusters this idea of controllability, kind of how we are able to control the situation around us. We know from decades and decades of research that this idea of taking control of the part we can control is huge for people in their ability to cope with things as they get stressful. A lot of this is around your training. We fall back on our training and we fall back on contingency planning. If A, then B. We're really good at that in the military. But knowing that you can fall back on that and knowing that you can control that part of this experience is really helpful for people, and it seems to increase their self-efficacy. Other principles of resilience here that are important, I'm sure many of you have heard the literature on this, are optimism, gratitude, and a sense of humor. So if I was going to say one thing, I've been trying to sort of consolidate these recommendations for people, one thing to maybe take forward from this talk and into your practice today. Data supports gratitude as a protective factor against stress-related conditions. And I think we'd all agree that we're in the middle of stress-related conditions right now. We know that for our patients and for ourselves, cultivating a gratitude practice is associated with diminished depression and anxiety. And right now, since we're fighting that anxiety curve, we need to be really paying attention to that. In addition, it's associated with reduction in burnout. And that matters for us. Right now, when things get a little more anxious around our patients and our clients and the people we take care of, gratitude practice is going to be something that we can really turn to. So what can you do? You can cultivate a culture of gratitude in your workplaces, in your families, in your practices. If you're with your team in any way, even virtually, huddle your team on a regular basis. Think about doing a 2-minute gratitude exercise at the start of a workday if you're with your team. Educate your staff on how important this is. What I do when I have a small group is I have the group basically go around a rapid fire circle, and I have people say one thing they're grateful for, and it can't be something that someone else has just said, and you can't say the same thing twice. And we go around the circle twice. And I ask people to pay attention to how they feel before and after that circle. It never fails. 100% of people say they feel better after going around the circle twice. It does change something. It changes something within us. I have another sort of idea for you as far as something you could be doing at home or in your practice. Every morning, think about this. Identify 3 things that you feel grateful for and appreciate in your life. Identify 3 things that you take for granted, but you're actually very thankful for. And identify 3 things that you appreciate about yourself. If you have a moment now and you have a piece of paper, maybe let's do one of each. Or if you don't have a piece of paper, that's okay. You can just think about it. Think about one thing that you appreciate about your life right now. And write it down if you can. Identify one thing that you take for granted, but you're actually very thankful for. And identify one thing that you appreciate about yourself. Feel free to use this with your patients. I'm sure many of you already do. It really can change someone's point of view. Make sure to use it for yourself, though. This is what's most important today. The second cluster of resilience factors kind of focus around this idea of finding meaning in your work, in your daily life, feeling calm and competent, and bringing your self-care resources to the table. This is that internal locus of control that we know is so protective. How do we do this? Well, we focus on the difference that we're making. We focus on the small victories. We point them out if we can. Pause to take attention, to pay attention to that, and maybe take a breath or two. What's really important for you as providers and as people who are caring for other people, it is really important to consciously schedule breaks in your day, even if they're just a minute, and add your self-care activities. We are horrible at self-care, horrible. I'm the first to admit that. I think we all will. But because of that, we need to schedule it. So let me just go with one recommendation here, mindfulness enhancement. Many of you might be familiar with the literature on mindfulness-based stress reduction, where we know that this is causing great changes in stress-related emotional and physical conditions. That's a specific protocol that can be taught, but there are benefits even in just moments of mindfulness. What are we talking about here? This is just an awareness of sensations, emotions, thoughts, without judgment, just accepting things exactly as they are. There are a lot of ways that people can express mindfulness in their lives that include such things as journaling or being with nature, listening to music. Many of you are probably familiar with and use a lot of these. So one goal would be to try to enhance mindfulness to help us increase gratitude. It also improves many other things. As many of you know, if you have a mindfulness practice, your sleep tends to be better, you tend to connect better with other people. So encourage that in yourselves and in your teams. How? Focus on 1-minute mindfulness moments. So I'm going to lead you through one just for a moment, and I'll just, hopefully you'll feel a little bit better. So everyone, if you feel comfortable, just close your eyes and settle yourself in a relaxed posture. And take a calming breath. And really focus on that breath, just being with the breath, just paying attention to what it feels like as air enters your nostrils, as it enters your lungs, Be aware of your shoulders and how they feel as you inhale, and how they feel as you exhale. Not trying to change it, just being with it. And as you are there with your breath, turn your attention to yourself. You're a unique individual, and you're blessed with imagination and the ability to communicate and the ability to learn from the past and plan for the future. You have the unique ability to overcome any pain that you might be experiencing. Take another comfortable breath in and say to yourself, for this, I am grateful. And you can just open your eyes. That was just about 1 minute and 10 seconds. And yet, I would probably bet that most of you feel a little bit better, feel a little centered, a little connected within yourself in a way that maybe you didn't before. This is excellent for team huddles. This is excellent for if you're going to be doing supervision or consultation with people. Take a moment and just lead them through a 1 to 2 minute gratitude exercise or mindfulness moment. Another idea that I was reminded of recently for myself, I know a lot of us are doing a lot of walking because that's what we're allowed to do. Our gyms are closed, and this is a way to get outside and also get some exercise. Take a mindfulness walk. Put yourself on a clock. Don't make yourself do it for the whole half an hour you're walking, but put yourself on a clock. Take a look at your watch, and for 1 minute as you're walking, be aware of the ground under your feet. Really look around and notice. Pay attention to everything that you're walking past. Pay attention to how the air feels as you breathe it in, how the sun feels on your back, how the breeze feels. Really be mindful as you're walking. This can also be very invigorating and calming for people. The third group of resilience principles, and they're so important, this is our social support group. This is our relationships, our trust, our connection with other people. These are people who understand, your colleagues and your team members, reminding you here to check in with your colleagues, to seek consultation and supervision, and potentially to think about team connection groups. And I'll explain that in a moment. I have a really quick piece here from Kelly McDonegal's excellent TED Talk on stress and connection. And I like to use it just because she says
Our
it
first shoe
so well.
was simple, it was beautiful, it was, as we say, the right amount of nothing.
It wants you to be surrounded by people who care about you. Okay, so how is knowing this side of stress going to make you healthier? Well, oxytocin doesn't only act on your brain, it also acts on your body. And one of its main roles in your body is to protect your cardiovascular system from the effects of stress. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It also helps your blood vessels stay relaxed during stress. But my favorite effect on the body is actually on the heart. Your heart has receptors for this hormone. And oxytocin helps heart cells regenerate and heal from any stress-induced damage. This stress hormone strengthens your heart. And the cool thing is that all of these physical benefits of oxytocin are enhanced by social contact and social support. So when you reach out to others under stress, either to seek support or to help someone else, you release more of this hormone, your stress response becomes healthier, and you actually recover faster from stress.
Just a little reminder, which many of you know. Oh, what happened? Where did my PowerPoint go? Many of you know this, that oxytocin, our connection hormone, is released when we connect with other people. When things get stressful, like right now, This is the time to connect with other people. So team connection groups are one idea if you are in a team. Ideal world, you would have outside facilitators. I know that's pretty hard to do right now, so really anything you could arrange would be a good thing. But just getting together with folks. Right now it might need to be on Zoom, but anyone who's working on your team, arranging a time to be together, a little bit of storytelling maybe, stories of small successes. Again, this is enhancing that competence, that internal locus of control, reminding people of the meaning of what they do in their work, but also connecting them with each other, which is just so important at this point. Social and family connection is directly related to the mediation of the stress response. So encourage your colleagues to maintain and enhance those social relationships in any way they can. I realize that's really challenging right now, but people are kind of forcing themselves to get creative. The other thing that's very important to know as providers is that right now is more important than ever that we watch out for one another and expect and allow other people to watch out for you. Ask for help and when to refer if you're concerned about someone that you know. Bottom line here, these are principles that have been used with warfighters on the front lines, like I told in my story. But in a pandemic, you may be dealing with similar kind of fatigue and exhaustion around this. So a couple of reminders. Develop a culture of gratitude. It just takes a minute a day. Ensure your staff members and your colleagues can detach and decompress effectively in order to have a chance to reset and recover. Encourage the use of gratitude and mindfulness practice. Develop a growth mindset and empower your people, and consider a referral or support as you need it. Most importantly, connect with each other. Encourage social support. Bottom line, it's okay if you're not okay. Expect yourself and your colleagues to be professional, competent, and resilient, and give yourself what you need. Know the resources that are available to you. Know and understand what we mean by this anxiety curve that we're all dealing with right now. The unknown, the unpredictability, not sure what's going to happen. This sounds familiar to military connected people. We've lived this before. It's hard. It's a hard way to live. And all of us are dealing with this and in this right now, kind of in this kind of parallel world, despite the fact that our communities look different. The anxiety curve is probably pretty universal. It really kind of seems to run through us all. I'm sure it's running through your patients. I've heard a lot of mental health providers tell me this is a theme with their patients right now, is the anxiety around this, around the unknown, around the fear, and that may be with us for some time. So how are we going to manage that? How are we going to manage the aftermath of all this? The aftermath of the fear. It's legitimate and it's real. And then know each other. Pay attention to those in your community that you call your colleagues and your friends. Pay attention to them and look out for them. Watch out for each other. Check in with each other. And do not wait to refer if you're concerned about someone. I know I'm speaking to you professionals who know this, but this is a time when people are, when they are more isolated, where they could be at higher risk. So really, really pay attention to that. Know what looks different in people that you work with, and pay attention, and don't be afraid to ask. And don't be afraid to tell people, it's okay if you're not okay. We do expect to get through this together, but it's okay if we need additional support along the way. My company, Psych Armor Institute, and our CEO is on the line with us today. I invited her to be here with the talk. Our company has a wealth of online resources for people who support veterans, which I know all of you do. It's psycharmor.org, and these are free courses that have everything from military culture to communication styles, and then a fair number of very specific healthcare provider courses, many of which have CEUs, the full-length ones, and CME, for those of you that can use CME, for some of the shorter courses. there are a number of resources like PsychArmor out there that are available for us as providers to educate ourselves and to help us feel more competent during this time to take care of each other and to take care of our patients. I highly encourage you to arm yourself with what you need in order to be as resilient as you can during this time. I thought I was hoping for about 10 minutes, and I think I nailed it. I would love to hear from you. Any thoughts, questions, comments, anything for me? Anything is fair game. If you'd like to come in through the chat box, that is fine. I'll probably try to pull that up here. Let's see. Can I do that? Where's my chat box? I can see you all as participants, but I don't see the chat box right now. Maybe I'll ask one of our hosts to read me if you see any chats.
Hi. Yeah, this is Mary Volanek.
Hi, Mary.
And there's just wonderful feedback. Wendy Buick says this was great. Thank you so much. Tina Atherall said, I really needed this today. Hillary Lum says, how can I introduce some of these techniques, especially into teams that aren't used to this?
Well, you know, I think that what I would probably suggest is something like letting folks know that there is a lot of evidence that these techniques work. I think sometimes people are not as familiar with the literature as others. And we're talking about decades of evidence behind gratitude practice, behind mindfulness, and behind social support as protective factors. So maybe explaining to your team that when things get stressful, we know there are things that put us at risk for having more problems around that stressful time, and there are things that protect us. And we know for sure that gratitude practice, mindfulness techniques, and social support are protective. There's zero question about that. There's so much literature about it that you'd spend weeks and weeks reading it if you sat down with it. So maybe just encouraging folks to open their minds and to try some things that we know have worked for people during stressful times.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you so much. Tammy Grundick asks, are there any suggestions for PTSD and dementia triggers caused by this isolation and masks with our patients?
Oh, that's probably an entire talk. So I am not an expert in dementia. I will start with that as a disclaimer for sure. I would definitely reach out to our experts, our neuropsychologists, our neurologists, our geriatric medicine folks, to find out what we need to know around isolation and how that might trigger problems with dementia. I have certainly heard that this is making things complicated for our Alzheimer's populations and other dementia populations. But I am not feeling like I could speak to that expertly. But it's a great question, and you're making me realize I'm going to go now find out for myself as well, because I know that that matters to a lot of us. For PTSD, I can speak to that. We know that isolation for folks that are struggling with PTSD and depression, for that matter, adds risk to the situation. So what I would suggest for your patients with depression or PTSD is to really strongly encourage / give them homework assignments / make them accountable to you about this. Strongly suggest that they are connecting with people that are on their crisis response plan card as their social supports, the people they would call, the people they can count on, the people that understand what they've been through. If you have combat veterans or those that have experienced trauma in their military service, go to those military connections that understand what they have been through, that they feel like they can just be with and not have to speak too much. Get back in touch, get on the phone, get on FaceTime, get on a Google Hangout, get on email with somebody, connect. I would give your patients homework assignments, and I would ask them to come back and be accountable to you about that. Social support is everything for depression and PTSD. It is such a huge part of the recovery and healing process for both of those. And especially now, we need to get creative and we need to force ourselves to do it even if we don't want to, even more than we normally do, right? With depression and PTSD. I'm sure you tell your patients, no, you have to reach out to someone, you have to go have lunch, you have to ask someone to go walk with you, whatever it is. Obviously, I'm not 100% sure of the situation in Colorado. You might be having your restrictions easing up a little bit more than some other places. If people have the ability to get together with small groups, like take a walk with somebody, that's ideal, of course. But if not, connection. Tell them to force themselves to do it. It's more important than ever.
That's a wonderful reminder. Thank you so much. Brian Stice says, my gratitude for the day is to Psych Armor and Dr. Kraft for the presentation and to VCP for their coordination and setting this up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, a lot of thank you. Does anybody have any more questions? Is this presentation going to be available? I jumped on late this AM.
I recorded it. This is my first time recording a Zoom, I have to be honest. So I did record it. It is recording as we speak. But I'm not sure what that looks like. So give me a little time logistically to get recorded to the cloud. So I'm assuming there's a link. So let me just find that link and I'll send it back to you, Mary.
Oh, I think that just sounds wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, and we will, this is Hillary Lum, so thank you all for joining us. Whether you found us through the VA or through the Veteran Community Partnership listserv or through a friend just invited you. We will post this recording probably for a month or so on our Veteran Community Partnership website. We'll put that information into the chat box so that you know where to find us. Also see the chat. I think Courtney has just put her email in. So if you are not receiving our Veteran Community Partnership emails, please contact Courtney. We don't want to necessarily have this recording up forever because we really value our partnerships with the VA and Psych Armor. We have a long track record and opportunity of partnering together in various capacities. And so I certainly encourage you to reach out directly to them if your organization would like to explore different potential opportunities. And then we also, hopefully it's in the chat, but maybe not yet, we have another webinar coming up soon. VCP really aims to be a forum for connecting VA teams and our community partner teams for a lot of different needs. And we're exploring a lot of different virtual options. So I wonder if Katie Civiletto from Given Hour, if you also, given that you and Mary were coordinating this, have any other closing thoughts or suggestions for individuals?
Thank you, Hillary. I think we're going to try to keep this going, and with the response that we received, we weren't sure what it was going to look like switching to virtual, but we are so excited. So many people chose to join. I'm hosting a webinar next week. I don't even know the date because I don't know what today is anymore. Working from home all the time. I'm looking now. I think it's the 26th at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I'm going to go over okay. Can you still hear me? Okay, my screen just went completely.
I just got back on, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to go over the healthy habits and some of the 5 signs of emotional suffering that Given Hour has put together through our campaign to change direction. And then I also just wanted to thank you, Dr. Kraft, for putting this together. When we spoke a couple of weeks ago, we weren't really sure exactly what it was going to look like, and you pulled together something so amazing and so incredible, and we were so excited that you were willing to do it. And from our conversation, what was said was incredible and inspiring. So we talked about potentially doing this again and sending out maybe some of the Psych Armor courses that support this work to share with people so that they can take them on their own if they want to do CEs or something like that. So we're so excited to work together and to continue this, whatever that looks like as we decide.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yes, and I did post in the chat box Katie's Zoom connection. It's a little choppy because I copied and pasted it, but it's all there, Zooming and all that stuff. Dr. Kraft, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all for participating today, and we look forward to more wonderful events like this. This has been so meaningful for a lot of us. So thank you so much.
I'm so glad. I think we ended up with like 87 people, as I think I saw that. So
yeah, that was a top number.
That's amazing.
Really,
I got goosebumps.
yeah, it's wonderful. So thank you all to all of you for everything you do for our veterans out there in Colorado. As a obviously veteran, I love you all. So thank you for everything you do for them, and please stay safe and continue to take good care of yourselves as well as them.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to your leadership for allowing us to steal you for an hour today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.